Everyone tells you that a 24-hour store is a safe place, that the lights are always on, that there is always somebody behind the counter, that the cameras are always running, that you can pull off the highway at any hour of the night and grab a snack and a coffee and a bottle of water and be back on the road in 5 minutes. No harm done. But what nobody tells you is that the rules of a normal day stop applying somewhere around 1 in the morning. That the people you meet at a gas station at 2 a.m. are not the same people you meet at noon, and that some nights, in some stores, the only thing standing between you and something very bad is the speed at which you realize you are the only customer in the building, and the man behind the counter is not actually behind the counter, and the man near the back is not actually shopping. This story might make you wait until morning the next time you run out of milk, and skip the late-night snack, and trust that small bad feeling in your chest the next time you put your hand on a door at the wrong hour. My name is Tyler. I was 24 years old, and I had just moved into a small studio apartment in Albuquerque, New Mexico, working as a line cook at a diner that closed at midnight, getting home around 12:30 most nights with my hair smelling of grease and my feet hurting, and absolutely no desire to do anything except crash on my mattress and sleep until 11 the next morning. I was a few months into the job. I did not know many people in the city yet. I lived alone, and on most nights I would stop at a small convenience store about 3 blocks from my apartment on the way home, just to grab a Gatorade and a candy bar and something to eat in front of the TV before bed. The kind of routine that was so automatic by that point I barely thought about it. The store was called something generic, one of those off-brand 24-hour places that was not part of any chain I recognized, just a small square building on a corner with bright fluorescent lights inside and a parking lot that was almost always empty after midnight. And the same older man worked the night shift every single night, a quiet guy in his 50s named Hector, who always nodded at me when I walked in and said goodnight when I walked out, and never said much else. I had been going there for almost 4 months when the night happened. It was a Tuesday. It was just past 2 in the morning. I had stayed late at the diner because we had a delivery come in at the wrong time, and I had to help unload it, and I was exhausted. And I pulled into the parking lot of the convenience store like I had 100 times before, and I parked under the same yellow streetlight I always parked under, and I noticed before I even got out of the car that something was different. The store looked normal from the outside. The lights were on, the open sign was lit, but the parking lot had 2 other cars in it, which was unusual at that hour. One was a small white sedan parked off to the side near the dumpster, and the other was a dark-colored pickup truck parked right in front of the entrance, taking up 2 spaces, with its engine still running. I sat in my car for maybe 10 seconds. I almost drove away. There was a small voice in the back of my head that said, "Just go home. You do not need a Gatorade. Just go to bed." But I was tired, I was thirsty, I was 3 blocks from my apartment, and I told myself I was being weird, that the truck was probably just somebody who had run inside to grab something quick. And I got out of my car, and I walked across the parking lot, and I pulled open the front door of the store. The first thing I noticed was that the radio was off. There was always music playing in that store, a classic rock station that Hector kept on at low volume all night. You could hear it from the door. It was part of the texture of walking in. And the radio was not playing. The store was completely silent. And the silence was so unexpected that I actually paused with the door half open, and I felt the cool air from inside the store on my face. And I felt that small voice in the back of my head get a little louder. I stepped inside. The second thing I noticed was that Hector was not behind the counter. The counter was empty. The register was sitting there with the small green light on it. The chair Hector usually sat in was empty, and there was nobody at the front of the store at all, which had also never happened in 4 months of stopping there. Hector was always at the counter. He was always reading a paperback or doing a Sudoku. He never left his post. The third thing I noticed was the man near the back of the store. He was standing in the aisle that had the chips and the candy bars, not facing the shelves, not picking anything up, not doing anything you would do if you were shopping. He was facing the back wall of the store, just standing there, very still, with his arms hanging at his sides, and he was wearing a dark hooded sweatshirt with the hood up, and I could only see the side of his face. And he did not turn when the door chime went off. He did not look at me. He did not move at all. I felt my stomach drop. I stood there in the entryway with the door slowly closing behind me, and I had this very strange thought, the kind of thought you have when your brain is trying very hard to make sense of something that does not make sense. I thought, maybe he is on the phone. Maybe he is having a hard moment. Maybe he is just a tired person standing in a store, and I almost let myself believe it. And then I noticed something else. The door behind the counter, the door that led to the back room where Hector kept the inventory, was open. It was never open. I had been to that store almost every single night for 4 months. That door was always closed. Hector kept it closed because I had once asked him about it, and he had told me the manager had a rule about it. The door was always closed when the store was open, and the door was open now. And there was no light coming from the back room, just a black rectangle behind the counter where a closed door was supposed to be. I made a decision very quickly. I did not turn around and run, because I was afraid that running would tell him something. I did not call out. I did not say hello. I just very slowly stepped sideways toward the magazine rack near the front of the store, like I was a normal customer browsing. And I picked up a magazine I did not want, and I held it open, and I tilted my head down like I was reading, and I used the reflection in the round security mirror in the corner of the ceiling to look at the man in the hooded sweatshirt without turning my head. He had moved. In the time it had taken me to pick up the magazine, he had turned around, and he was now facing my direction, still standing in the same spot in the aisle, still with his hood up, and he was looking right at me, through the rack of chips, and I saw, in the round mirror, the lower half of his face, and I saw that he was smiling. I put the magazine back on the rack. I did not look at him directly. I walked very calmly toward the front door, like I had forgotten my wallet in my car, and I pulled the door open, and the door chime went off again, and I stepped out into the parking lot, and I walked. I did not run. I walked to my car, and I locked the doors, and I started the engine, and I pulled out of the parking lot, and I did not breathe out until I was 2 blocks away. I called 911 from my apartment. I told the dispatcher everything. The empty counter, the open back room door, the man in the hood, the truck with the engine running, and she told me to stay on the line, and she dispatched units to the store, and she stayed on the phone with me while they drove there, and I sat on my mattress in my studio apartment with all of my lights on and waited. The dispatcher called me back about 40 minutes later. She told me very carefully that the officers had arrived at the store, that they had found the situation in progress, and that I had likely walked into the middle of an armed robbery, and that I should not come to the store for any reason that night, and that an officer would call me in the morning to take a more detailed statement. And she thanked me for calling, and she hung up. I learned the rest of the story over the next 2 days from the officer who took my statement. There had been 2 men in that store, the one I had seen in the hooded sweatshirt, and another one who had been in the back room with Hector, the back room I had not been able to see into because the door was open and the light was off. And they had been there for almost 20 minutes when I walked in, and Hector had been on the floor of the back room with his hands zip-tied behind his back. And the second man had been standing over him with a gun, going through the safe, while the first man had been in the front of the store watching the parking lot through the glass to see if anybody pulled in. The officer told me that when I had walked in, the first man had not signaled the second man because there was a panic button under the counter that Hector could have hit if he had been at the register, and the first man had been waiting to see what I would do, whether I would notice anything, and that if I had walked toward the counter to ask where the cashier was, or if I had walked toward the back of the store, the situation would have ended differently for both me and Hector. The officer told me that what I had done, picking up the magazine, looking in the mirror, walking out without saying a word, was probably the only reason I was alive, and the only reason Hector was alive, because the first man had clearly decided I had not seen anything and had let me leave, and I had been able to call the police before he had finished what he came to do. Hector survived. He had a concussion and a fractured wrist from when they had pulled him into the back, but he survived, and he was back at work 2 weeks later, And the first time I walked into that store after the night, he came out from behind the counter and he hugged me without saying anything. And we both stood there for a minute by the magazine rack. And then he went back to his stool and he turned the radio back on and he did not say a word about it. And I bought my Gatorade and my candy bar and I went home. The two men were caught about 3 weeks later in a different city after they tried the same thing at a different convenience store, and they took plea deals, and they are in prison now, and I do not know exactly for how long. I still stop at convenience stores sometimes, late at night. I am not paranoid, I am not afraid of the world, but I learned something in that store in Albuquerque that I want to leave you with tonight. Your gut tells you things before your brain can put them into words. The radio that is not playing, the cashier that is not at the counter, the man in the aisle who is not actually shopping, the truck in the parking lot with the engine still running. Your gut sees all of it before your brain has even finished walking through the door. The next time it tells you to leave, do not finish picking up your magazine. Just leave. Everyone tells you that filling up your gas tank is the most ordinary thing in the world, that you swipe your card, you click the pump, you stand there for 2 minutes scrolling through your phone, and you get back in your car and you drive away. And the entire transaction is so boring that most of the time you cannot even remember which gas station you stopped at the next morning. But what nobody tells you is that a gas station at the wrong hour, on the wrong stretch of highway, in the wrong part of the country, can be one of the most isolated places you will ever stand in your life. That you are out in the open under bright lights with no walls around you and no people nearby. And the people who know that and who hunt that do not look like monsters. They look like tired men in truckers' hats who walk up to you holding a cup of coffee and ask you a perfectly normal question, and the only thing that saves you is whether you give them the right answer. This story might make you stop only at busy gas stations from now on and never at the empty ones off the exit ramp. And remember that the most dangerous people in the world are the ones who know exactly how to make a normal moment feel normal until it is too late. My name was Caitlin. I was 26 years old, and I was driving alone from Denver to Kansas City to visit my sister who had just had her first baby. And I had left Denver at about noon on a Friday, with the plan of arriving at her house by around 8 in the evening, with 1 or 2 stops along the way for gas and food. I was driving a small blue hatchback I had owned since college. I had a full tank of gas when I left. I had a small overnight bag in the back seat. I had a paper map in the glove compartment because I did not fully trust GPS in the middle of nowhere. And I had told my sister and my mom both that I was on the road, and I had a routine of texting them at every stop. The kind of safety routine you build when you have driven cross-country alone a few times. The drive was uneventful for the first 6 hours. I stopped once for gas in eastern Colorado. I ate a granola bar in the car. I listened to a true crime podcast that I now think back on as deeply ironic. And I made it almost all the way through Kansas before I noticed my tank was getting low, somewhere around 7:30 in the evening, with about an hour and a half of driving still ahead of me. The sun was almost down. The stretch of I-70 I was on was one of the emptier stretches, long flat farmland on either side, exits every 20 or 30 miles, no real towns to speak of, just little clusters of buildings around the off-ramps, a Subway, a Casey's, a Love's truck stop here and there, and I started looking for a gas sign on the next few exits. I should have stopped at the next big truck stop I saw. There was a Love's coming up that I could see from miles away because of the tall sign, but I had a moment of impatience, the kind of small bad decision you make on a long drive when you just want to get there. And I saw a smaller blue gas sign at an earlier exit, an exit that did not have any other businesses I could see from the highway, just the gas station and what looked like a grain silo in the distance, and I told myself I would be in and out faster at a smaller place than at a busy truck stop, and I took the exit. I was wrong.
The gas station at the bottom of the off-ramp was small and old, a single cinder block building with 3 pumps in front of it, the kind of place that probably used to be a brand name station and was now an independent. The lit sign on the road did not have a price on it anymore, just a generic gas in white letters, and there were no other cars at any of the pumps, and there was one car parked along the side of the building, an old burgundy pickup truck with mud on the wheels. I pulled up to the pump closest to the road, the one with the easiest exit back onto the highway, because that is a habit I had picked up from a friend years ago. Always park where you can drive forward to leave. And I got out, and I swiped my card, and I started pumping. And I stood there looking at my phone, and I texted my sister, "Just stopped for gas, 90 minutes out, see you soon." The pump was slow. These small, old pumps always pumped slowly, and my tank was almost empty, and I knew I was going to be standing there for at least 4 or 5 minutes. And that was when I noticed the man. He came out of the small store building, the door ching jingling behind him, and he was carrying a styrofoam cup of coffee, and he was wearing a faded blue trucker's hat pulled low over his eyes, a flannel shirt, jeans, work boots, and he was somewhere in his 40s or 50s, average build, average everything, the kind of man you would see at any gas station in rural Kansas at any hour of any day and not think twice about. And he started walking, and he walked across the small parking lot, and he was walking toward me. I did not look up at him directly.
I kept my eyes on my phone, but I tracked him in my peripheral vision, and I watched his shadow move across the concrete, and I noticed that his path was not toward his truck. His path was angled toward me, and as he got closer, he raised one hand in a small, friendly wave, and he called out from about 10 feet away, in a normal, pleasant voice. He said, "Hey, I am sorry to bother you." I looked up. I gave him the small, polite smile you give a stranger at a gas station, the kind that says, "I see you, but I am not interested in a conversation." And I said, "No problem, what is up?" And he walked closer, and he stopped about 4 feet from me, and he held up his coffee cup like it was a peace offering, and he said his question. He said, "Are you traveling alone tonight, or is somebody meeting you up the road?" The question landed strangely. It was not a normal question. It was not, "Do you have jumper cables?" It was not, "Can I borrow your phone for a quick call?" Those were the questions a stranger at a gas station might reasonably ask. This was a different kind of question. This was a question about my situation. This was a question with no practical answer he needed. And I felt that small voice in the back of my head, the same voice every woman knows. Get sharp. Right now. Get sharp. I did not panic. I did not act like anything was wrong. I smiled at him. I lied as smoothly as I have ever lied in my life. I said, "Oh, my husband is meeting me at the next exit. He just texted me. He's right behind me, actually. He should be pulling in any minute." And I held up my phone like I was showing him a text, and I gave a little laugh, and I said, "He gets nervous when I drive alone. I do not have a husband. I have never had a husband." The man's face did something for a fraction of a second, a small flicker. The smile did not change, but something behind his eyes shifted, like a person recalculating. And he said, "Oh, that's sweet of him." And he took a slow sip of his coffee, and he glanced down the off-ramp toward the highway, and he said, "Well, you have a safe drive then." And he turned, and he walked back toward the burgundy pickup truck, and he got in, and he started the engine, but he did not pull out. He just sat there in the truck with the engine running. The pump clicked off behind me. I do not remember finishing the transaction. I do not remember putting the nozzle back. I do not remember closing my gas cap. I just remember being in my car with the doors locked and pulling out of the gas station as fast as I could without looking like I was running. And I got back on I-70 going east, and within 30 seconds I saw headlights pull out of the gas station behind me, and I saw the burgundy pickup truck merge onto the highway about a quarter-mile back, and I saw it settle in behind me at a steady distance, and I knew with absolute certainty
that he was following me. I called 911 from the road. I put the dispatcher on speaker, and I told her exactly where I was. I told her about the gas station. I told her about the question. I told her about the truck behind me, and I gave her the partial license plate I had been able to read in the rearview mirror under the gas station lights. And she stayed on the line with me, and she told me to keep driving at a normal speed, to not exit the highway, to keep the truck behind me, and that she was going to dispatch a Kansas Highway Patrol unit to my location. The truck followed me for almost 12 miles. The dispatcher stayed with me, calm, steady, asking me small questions to keep me focused. What color is my car? What is my license plate? Am I okay on gas? And I drove at exactly the speed limit, and I watched the headlights of the burgundy pickup truck stay at exactly the same distance behind me, mile after mile. And the sun finished going down somewhere in the middle of those 12 miles, and the highway got dark, and the only thing in my mirror was those two headlights. The highway patrol unit appeared in my rearview mirror with its lights off, just a regular dark sedan I wouldn't have recognized as a cop car. And the dispatcher told me, very calmly, that the trooper was going to pass me, and then he was going to slow down and pull in behind the pickup truck, and that I should not change my speed, and I should not look in my mirrors more than normal, and I should just keep driving toward the next exit she was going to direct me to.
The trooper did exactly that. He passed me, he slowed, he settled in behind the burgundy pickup truck, and within about 30 seconds his lights came on, and the truck pulled to the shoulder, and the dispatcher told me to take the next exit and to drive to a brightly lit truck stop where another unit would meet me. And I did. And another trooper was waiting for me, and he had me sit in his car while he took my statement, and he told me to wait there until they had more information. The man in the truck had a long history. The trooper would not give me his full record, but he told me that night, sitting in the front seat of his patrol car at a Love's truck stop in eastern Kansas, that the man had served time before, that he had outstanding warrants in 2 states, that he had been linked but never charged in 2 prior incidents involving women at rural gas stations, and that the trooper himself believed I was very lucky, and that I had done several right things in a row, and that the most important right thing I had done was lie about the husband. He told me that men like that test you with the question, that the question itself is the test, that they are not looking for a conversation, they are looking for the answer to one piece of information. Are you alone? And that if you say yes, the next thing that happens is they offer to follow you to make sure you make it safely to the next exit. And they mean it, but not in the way you think. He told me my lie had probably saved my life. The man was arrested that night, taken in on the warrants, and was eventually charged with several other things based on items found in his truck, items I do not want to describe. And he is in prison now, and I have not heard about him since. I made it to my sister's house in Kansas City a few hours later than planned. I did not tell her what had happened that night. I held her baby on the couch in her living room and I cried a little, and she thought it was just because the baby was beautiful, and I let her think that, and I did not tell her the real reason for almost a year. I drive cross-country a lot less now. When I do, I only stop at the biggest, brightest, busiest truck stops I can find, the ones with lots of cars and lots of people and lots of cameras. And I never take small exits where there is only a gas station, and I never tell anybody at any gas station that I am alone. And I have a small lie ready in my mouth at all times. My husband is right behind me. My brother is meeting me at the next exit. My dad is in the bathroom. Whatever the situation seems to call for, I have something ready. I learned something at that gas station in Kansas that I want to leave you with tonight. Sometimes a stranger does not need to take anything from you to hurt you. They just need a single piece of information, one true answer to one casual question. And once you give it to them, the rest of what they were going to do becomes very easy. And the rest of what you were going to do, the visit with your sister, the rest of the drive, the rest of your life, becomes very, very fragile. So, lie. If a stranger ever asks you,
on a dark highway, in an empty parking lot, in any place where you are alone and you can feel that small voice in your chest telling you something is wrong. Lie. You do not owe a stranger the truth about whether you are by yourself. You owe yourself the next morning.
Everyone tells you that a storage unit is the most boring kind of building in the world. Just a long row of orange or blue metal doors in a fenced lot off a frontage road, full of the things people could not throw away and could not fit in their houses. Old furniture, Christmas decorations, college textbooks, the wedding dress of a marriage that did not last. And that nothing interesting ever happens at a storage facility because there is nothing in there worth stealing or nobody who would bother. But what nobody tells you is that a storage facility is one of the most isolated places you can stand inside a city. That the long rows of identical doors create blind spots that the cameras cannot cover. That the gate code system is only as secure as the worst employee who has ever quit. And that some people do not rent storage units to store things. They rent them to do things. Things they cannot do in a house with neighbors and windows and a wife who would notice the missing hours. And the unit they rent is sometimes only 2 or 3 doors down from yours. This story might make you check the lock on your storage unit a little more carefully the next time you visit, and notice the cars in the lot, and pay attention to the unit doors that are open just a crack with no person in sight. My name is Dylan. I was 32 years old, and I had just gone through a divorce and moved out of the house I'd owned with my ex-wife in a suburb of Sacramento, California. And I was living in a small one-bedroom apartment that was about a third the size of the house, and I had rented a 10 by 15 storage unit at a facility off the interstate to hold all of the things from my old life that I could not bring myself to either keep or throw away. The unit had my woodworking tools, the ones I had not touched in 2 years but could not part with because my dad had given them to me. It had a few boxes of books. It had the framed art that had hung in the hallway of the old house. It had my late grandfather's army trunk. It had 2 filing boxes of paperwork from the marriage that my lawyer had told me to hold on to for at least 3 years. And it had a small safe with a few old watches and some cash and the deed to a piece of land my grandmother had left me in Oregon. I went to the unit about once a month. I would drive over on a Sunday afternoon, I would unlock the padlock, I would roll up the metal door, I would dig around for whatever specific thing I needed, an old tax document, a particular book, a tool, and I would lock up and leave. And the whole visit would take maybe 20 minutes. And the staff at the front office knew my face, and the gate code worked. And the routine was so unremarkable that I never thought about it. The facility was not a high-end one. It was a mid-range place, a long rectangular property with about 300 units arranged in 8 rows, a coded gate at the front, a small office where one employee sat during business hours, and cameras on the corners of the buildings. But the cameras only covered the main aisles, and the corners of the rows were dead zones, and I had figured this out one afternoon when I had walked the property looking for a unit number I had misremembered and had noticed the cameras were not aimed at the ends of the rows. My unit was almost at the end of one of those rows. It was the 3rd unit from the end, on the back row, the row that ran along the back fence of the property, and the row was quiet. I almost never saw anybody else when I was there. The units around mine were rented, but I had never seen the renters, and I never thought about that as anything other than convenient, because nobody being around meant I could pull my truck right up to my door and load and unload in peace. The Sunday afternoon happened in late April. It was a warm day, sunny. I had driven over to grab a specific book my brother had asked to borrow, a hiking guide for the Sierras that I had bought years ago and forgotten about. And I had pulled up to my unit, and I had gotten out of my truck, and I had reached for my padlock. And that was the first moment I noticed something was wrong. My padlock was on the door. It was locked. It looked exactly like it was supposed to look, but something about it was off. And I stood there for a second, holding the lock in my hand, and I realized what was wrong. The lock was rotated. I am the kind of person, and I know how this sounds, who locks my padlock with the keyhole pointed down every single time. It is a habit my father drilled into me when I was a teenager. He had told me that locks last longer when the keyhole faces down because rain and dust do not get inside the mechanism, and I had done it that way for 15 years without thinking about it. Every padlock on every door I had ever locked, keyhole down. The keyhole on my padlock was pointing up. I stood there for a long moment in the warm afternoon sun with the padlock in my hand, and I told myself I was being paranoid, that I had probably just been in a hurry the last time, that I had locked it the wrong way and forgotten, that this was nothing. But I knew that was not true. I knew because I had been to the unit the previous month, and I had a very clear memory of standing there and double-checking the lock the way I always did, keyhole down, and I had walked away. I unlocked the padlock. I rolled up the metal door, slowly, and I stood at the threshold of the unit, and I looked inside. And at first glance, everything looked exactly the way I had left it. The boxes were stacked the same way, the furniture was where I had put it, the army trunk was in the back corner, the safe was on top of the trunk. All of it looked normal. But I stood there for a long time before I stepped inside, because something about the air in the unit felt different. It smelled like a person. That is the only way I can describe it. The unit smelled faintly like sweat, the way a small enclosed room smells when somebody has been in it for a while. And the unit had no ventilation. The unit was a sealed metal box that had been sitting in the sun all morning, and the smell was not strong, but it was there. And it was not the smell of dust and old wood and cardboard that had always been the smell of that unit before. I stepped inside. I walked the perimeter, and I started to notice small things. The army trunk had been moved. It had not been moved far, maybe 6 inches forward from the back wall, but I had pushed it tight against the back wall the day I had moved in. I had specifically angled it so that I could fit a bookcase next to it, and now there was a gap, a 6-inch gap of bare concrete between the back of the trunk and the back wall. The safe on top of the trunk had been turned. It was a small floor safe, about the size of a microwave, and I had set it on top of the trunk with the keypad facing the door so I could see it when I rolled up the unit. And now the keypad was facing sideways, toward the wall, and the safe was sitting at a slight angle, like somebody had picked it up, done something with it, and put it back down without looking at exactly how it had been before. The most chilling thing was the floor. There was a thin layer of fine concrete dust on the floor of the unit, the kind of dust that always settled in storage units. And in that layer of dust, near the middle of the floor, was a small, clean rectangle, about the size of a folding chair, where the dust had been disturbed, like somebody had been sitting on something in the middle of my unit. And a few feet away, there was a similar disturbance in the dust, smaller, like a backpack or a bag had been set down for a while. I walked back out of the unit. I rolled the door down, I locked the padlock with the keyhole pointed down, and I walked very quickly back to my truck, and I drove around the long way out of the storage facility, taking the main aisle past the front office, and I went inside and asked to see the manager. The manager was a woman in her 50s named Linda. I told her, calmly, that I thought somebody had been inside my unit, and I told her about the lock and the trunk and the safe and the dust on the floor, and I asked her if she could pull the camera footage for the past month for the back row. And she looked at me for a long moment, and then she sighed, and she told me to come into the back office. She told me they had been having problems. She told me that one of their former employees, a young man who had worked the front desk for about 8 months, had been let go 3 weeks earlier after they had caught him in the system at strange hours, accessing tenant records he had no reason to access, and that they had reset all of the gate codes after firing him, but that there was a possibility he had a master gate fob that had not been deactivated properly, and that they had been investigating quietly because they didn't want to alarm tenants until they were sure. She told me they had already had 2 other tenants come in with similar reports.
She pulled the footage for the back row of cameras, the only ones that even partially covered the area near my unit, and we sat in her office for almost 2 hours scrubbing through the past 3 weeks of footage. And on a Wednesday night, about 10 days earlier, just after the office had closed at 6, we saw him. It was a young man in his mid-20s. I recognized him immediately as the kid who had checked me in 2 years earlier when I had first rented the unit. And he was walking down the back row of the storage facility, and he was carrying a folding chair and a small backpack. And he stopped at my unit, and he set down the chair, and he set down the backpack, and he produced a key from his pocket, and he unlocked my padlock, and he rolled up my door, and he walked inside, and he rolled the door back down behind him, and the footage just sat there, on a closed metal door for the next 4 hours. He came out at 11:30 at night. He rolled up the door, he carried out the folding chair and the backpack, he relocked my padlock, he walked back down the row, and he disappeared into the parking lot. And the footage stopped because the cameras did not cover the parking lot well enough to track him to a vehicle. Linda called the police. I called the police. The officers came to the storage facility that evening. They took my full statement. They took Linda's statement. They took the footage. And they told me that the young man, whose name was Caleb, had been arrested in 2 other counties in the past 6 months for similar things, that he had a pattern of using temporary jobs at storage facilities and self-storage rental places to make copies of master keys and to learn tenant schedules from the front office software, and that he had not been stealing things. And that was the strange part. He had not been taking anything. He had been using the units. He had been using them as private rooms, the officer told me, places where he could sit for hours alone, away from his roommate, away from his life, doing whatever it was he did in there. And they had searched 2 of the units he had been visiting at his previous job in another county, and they had found what they had found. And the officer told me he was not going to describe it to me because I did not need to carry it around. But he told me Caleb had been using my unit for at least 3 of those 4 hours sitting in a folding chair, and that they had searched my unit that afternoon as a precaution, and that they had not found anything, and that I should still consider replacing every item that had been inside the unit during the period of access. I did. I rented a U-Haul that next weekend. I cleared out the entire unit, every box, every piece of furniture, my dad's woodworking tools, my grandfather's army trunk, all of it. And I drove it to a different storage facility on the other side of the city, and I went through every single item before I put it into the new unit. And a few of the items I threw away even though they were fine, because I could not bring myself to keep them after knowing he had been alone with them. And I bought a brand new padlock with a brand new key for the new unit, and I changed the way I locked it. Keyhole sideways now, just in case anybody was watching for the down. Caleb was eventually arrested for several charges across multiple counties, and he is in prison now. And the officer who handled my case told me, when I called him a few months later for an update, that the things they had found in his other units suggested he had been escalating, and that whatever he had been planning, he had not gotten to do it yet, and that I had probably caught him at the very beginning of using my unit specifically, and not at the end. I asked him why a person would use a storage unit for that. He told me, very simply, that storage units were the only places in a city where you could rent 4 sealed walls and a metal door for $40 a month with no neighbors, no windows, no lease cosigner, no reference checks. And the only thing harder to find in a private space in a city was a private space that nobody could hear you in. And a storage unit gave you both. I learned something at that storage facility in Sacramento that I want to leave you with tonight. The most ordinary buildings in the world, the ones you have driven past 100 times without noticing, the ones full of dusty boxes and sleeping bags and Christmas trees, are also some of the loneliest buildings in the world. And loneliness is what people who want to do bad things have always needed. So when you go to your storage unit, look at your padlock. Look at the way the keyhole is pointing. Look at the dust on the floor when you roll the door up. And if anything at all looks slightly off from the way you left it, do not step inside.
Everyone tells you that a parking garage is just a building with cars in it, that thousands of people walk through them every day without anything happening, that the lights are on, the cameras are running, and the whole structure is so ordinary that you have probably walked through one in the last week and forgotten you did. But what nobody tells you is that a parking garage is one of the only places in a city where you are guaranteed to be alone for at least 60 seconds at the worst possible moment, when you are tired, when your hands are full, when your keys are in your hand, when your back is turned to 100 parked cars you cannot see between, and that the people who hunt that 60 seconds know it the way a fisherman knows a river bend. They know exactly where to stand, and exactly when to move, and exactly which level of the garage to choose.
This story might make you walk to your car a little differently tomorrow night and look between the cars instead of past them and trust the small wrong feeling that hits you the moment your shoes start echoing on the concrete and you realize how far away your car actually is. My name is Megan. I was 29 years old, and I was working as a junior associate at a law firm in downtown Cincinnati, Ohio. The kind of job where the partners pretended they were going to leave at 6 but never did. The kind of job where if you were billing your hours, you were also living at your desk. And I was 3 years into it, and I was tired in a way that I did not have words for at the time. I parked every morning in a public parking garage about 2 blocks from the office. The garage was a 6-level concrete structure attached to a small downtown shopping plaza. The lower 2 levels were usually full by 8 in the morning, and the upper levels were where the people who arrived later or who stayed later ended up parking. And because I worked late more nights than not, I almost always parked on the 4th or 5th floor, and I almost always walked back to my car alone, somewhere between 9 and 11 at night, with my laptop bag over my shoulder and my keys already in my hand. I had a routine. I had developed it without thinking about it, the way you develop any routine you do 5 nights a week. I would leave the office, I would walk the 2 blocks to the garage, I would take the elevator up to whatever floor I had parked on, I would walk to my car, I would unlock it, I would get in, I would lock the doors immediately, I would start the engine, and I would drive down the spiral ramp and out of the garage and home. And the whole thing took maybe 4 or 5 minutes, and I had done it hundreds of times. The night happened in late February. It was cold, it was raining a little. It was a Thursday. I had stayed late working on a deposition that needed to be ready by Friday morning, and I left the office at about 10:15. And the streets were empty the way downtown Cincinnati gets empty on a weeknight. Just 1 or 2 cars at the lights, the bars on the next block over still glowing, but the office buildings dark except for the cleaning crews on the higher floors. I walked the 2 blocks to the garage with my umbrella up. I pressed the button for the elevator. The elevator came and I rode it up alone, and I got off on the 4th floor and I started walking toward my car, which was parked maybe 30 spots down the row. And I noticed, the way you sometimes notice things only after they are already happening, that the 4th floor was almost completely empty. There were maybe 6 cars on the entire floor. My car was one of them, parked alone in the middle of a row, and the floor was lit by those long fluorescent tubes that always hum slightly, and the concrete echoed every step I took. And I started counting in my head, the way I always did, 30 steps to the car, 20 steps, 10 steps, the way you count when you are trying to make yourself feel like you are in control of something. That was when I saw him. He was standing between 2 parked cars about 4 spots before mine in the row I was walking down. He was standing in the gap between an SUV and a smaller sedan, and he was completely still, and he was facing the row I was walking in, and he was watching me approach. He was tall. He was wearing dark clothes. He was not pretending to do anything. He was not on a phone. He was not putting groceries in a trunk. He was not unlocking a car. He was just standing in the gap between 2 parked cars in an empty parking garage at 10:30 at night, watching a woman walk to her car alone. I have replayed this moment in my head 1,000 times since. The thing I want you to understand is that it was not a horror movie moment. He did not have a weapon visible. He did not start running at me. He did not say anything. The wrongness was quieter than that. The wrongness was that there was no possible explanation for why he was standing where he was standing. No innocent reason a person would be motionless in that exact hour with their body angled toward an approaching stranger. I did several things very quickly. I did not turn around because I was already past the elevator, and turning back would have meant walking past him at a different angle, and instinct told me that was worse. I did not run because I knew running would tell him that I had seen him as a threat yet, and I did not want him to know that yet. I did not look directly at him because I did not want him to know I had registered him.
What I did was I changed direction without breaking stride. I angled away from my car. I angled toward the next row, where there were 2 more cars parked, and I pulled my phone out of my coat pocket like I had just gotten a call, and I put it to my ear, and I said, very loudly, in a normal, cheerful voice, "Hey Dad, I am almost at the car. I see your headlights. Are you on level 4? I will be right there." I was not on the phone with anybody. My phone was not even unlocked. I just kept walking, and I kept talking, and I kept my voice loud and casual, and I walked at a brisk pace toward the next row, and I crossed into it, and as soon as I was around the corner of a parked SUV that blocked his line of sight, I broke into a run, and I ran toward the stairwell at the corner of the floor, and I yanked open the heavy metal door, and I went into the stairwell, and I took the stairs 2 at a time going down, and I got to the lobby of the garage, and I went straight to the small attendant booth at the entrance. The attendant was an older man in his 60s who I had said hello to 100 times. I told him, very fast, that there was a man on the 4th floor, that he was standing between 2 cars, that he was watching people, that I had not gotten to my car, and the attendant looked at me, and he saw my face, and he did not ask any questions. He picked up his phone, and he called building security, and he told me to come inside the booth, and he locked the door of the booth behind me. Building security came within about 3 minutes. 2 officers, a man and a woman, both in uniform, both with radios. And they got the camera footage from the 4th floor pulled up on the monitor in the booth while we waited. And we watched the previous 20 minutes. And we watched a tall man in dark clothes walk up the spiral ramp on foot, not from any car, not from the elevator, on foot from the street level, walk up 4 full floors of the garage, and stop on the 4th floor and walk down the row and position himself in the gap between the SUV and the sedan, and stand there and not move for almost 11 minutes. He had been waiting. He had been waiting before I got there. He had walked up 4 floors of an empty garage at 10 in the evening on foot without a vehicle, and he had picked a spot in a row that had exactly 1 car parked at the end, my car, and he had stood there in the gap between 2 other cars in the dark, and he had waited for whoever was going to come back to that car. And the only reason I am sitting here telling you this story is that I had angled away. The officers went up to the 4th floor. They did not find him. He was gone the moment I had broken into a run. He had heard my footsteps change, or he had seen me on a camera, or he had simply realized I had not walked to my car like he had expected me to, and he had left. And the camera footage caught him walking very calmly back down the spiral ramp on foot, out of the garage, out into the rain, and away down the street, and they lost him. The Cincinnati police took the case the next morning. They pulled the camera footage from the street outside the garage. They pulled the footage from a bus stop a block away. They pulled the footage from a bank ATM across the street, and they put together a picture of the man, and they ran his face, and they got a hit. He had been arrested in Indianapolis 2 years earlier for an assault outside a different parking garage on a different woman who had not been as lucky as me, who had not seen him in time, who had been hospitalized for almost 21 weeks and had moved out of the city after she recovered. And he had served 18 months and had been released 6 months before the night he was on the 4th floor of my garage. He was arrested 10 days later in a different state for an unrelated parole violation, and the Cincinnati case was added to his list of charges, and they were able to tie him through the camera footage and a few items he had on him at the time of the arrest to at least 2 other women in 2 other cities who had reported feeling followed in parking garages and had not been able to identify who. He took a plea deal. He is in prison now, and I have been told he will be in prison for several years. I do not work at that law firm anymore. I left about a year after that night. Not because of him exactly, but because something inside me had changed, and I could not pretend it had not. I could not stay late at a desk in a building where the walk to my car was the most dangerous part of my day. I could not bill 70 hours a week, knowing the last 20 minutes of every one of those days were spent walking through a concrete building I no longer trusted. I work at a smaller firm now, in a city I am not going to name, in an office building that has its own enclosed underground garage with a security guard at the door and an elevator that requires a badge, and I do not work past 7, ever, for any reason, and if I have to work later, I work from home. I learned several things on the 4th floor of that garage in Cincinnati that I want to leave you with tonight. The first thing is the obvious one. Do not assume an empty parking garage is empty. Look between the cars before you walk past them, not just down the aisles. The second thing is that pretending to be on the phone is not a magic trick, but it is a tiny crack of doubt. It tells the person watching you that you might not be as alone as they thought you were, and that crack is sometimes enough. The third thing, and the one I want you to actually hear, is that the man between two cars on a quiet floor of a parking garage was not standing there because of bad luck. He was standing there because he had picked that floor and that row and that gap and that hour with care. And the only reason he picked it was because he had been to enough garages to know exactly where the cameras did not see and exactly when the elevators stopped getting busy. These are not random. These are never random. So when you walk to your car alone tonight, or tomorrow night, or any night, look at the gaps between the cars. Listen for the second set of footsteps. Watch the rows for somebody who is standing very still without a reason. And if anything at all makes the small voice in your chest tell you not to walk to your car yet, walk back to the elevator instead. Your car will still be there in the morning. You might not be.